What you are about to hear is not a wrestling storyline. It is not scripted drama or choreographed chaos designed to sell tickets. Brock Lesnar was actually arrested at Madison Square Garden, hauled away by real police officers while the entire WWE universe stood in disbelief. And the man who made that call was none other than Triple H himself, the chief content officer of the biggest professional wrestling company on the planet, a man who has stared down the most dangerous performers in the history of this business and decided that on this particular night, at this particular moment, law enforcement was the only option left on the table. Welcome to FameWire, and tonight we are breaking down every single detail of what unfolded at Madison Square Garden, because this situation has spiraled so far beyond the boundaries of sports entertainment that even WWE's own management structure could not contain it. Let us start from the very beginning, because the sequence of events here is critical to understanding just how close this entire situation came to becoming something genuinely catastrophic. The segment opened the way so many segments do, with Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman standing in the ring at Madison Square Garden. Standard setup. Heyman on the microphone doing what he has always done better than anyone else in this business, building anticipation, establishing dominance, and reminding the entire world why Brock Lesnar is the most feared competitor in professional wrestling. And then Omos's music hit, and the entire dynamic of that arena shifted in an instant. Omos, the rising monster, the man who has been dismantling opponents with frightening ease and refuses to acknowledge Brock Lesnar's legendary status as anything more than a target, made his way toward the ring. Adam Pearce, WWE's on-screen authority figure and the man responsible for maintaining some semblance of order during live events, immediately recognized how dangerous this moment was becoming. He understood that if these two men were allowed to collide before WrestleMania, the consequences could be devastating, so he did what any responsible official would do in that situation. He called for security. Multiple guards rushed to ringside to establish a physical barrier between the two monsters and prevent an uncontrolled confrontation from breaking out in front of a sold-out Madison Square Garden crowd. And Omos went through every single one of them as though they simply were not there. This was not a situation where security managed to slow him down or create meaningful separation. This was a dominant, unstoppable force moving through trained personnel with such ease and such complete disregard that it was genuinely embarrassing to watch. He was not wrestling them. He was not cooperating with their attempts to restrain him. He was simply powering through with the kind of physical authority that cannot be taught and cannot be manufactured. And then, as though the destruction of WWE's entire security team was not statement enough, Omos shoved Adam Pearce directly to the floor. Not a violent assault, but a slow and dismissive push that sent the authority figure sprawling and made it perfectly clear that management's rules and management's personnel meant absolutely nothing when Omos had decided he wanted to stand in that ring and look Brock Lesnar in the eyes. That moment of eye contact, with security scattered and Pearce on the floor and nothing standing between two of the most physically imposing men in the history of this company, is when Triple H made his entrance. And here is what is important to understand about that moment. This was not Triple H the performer. This was not the game, the cerebral assassin, the 14-time world champion stepping through that curtain to play a character for a television audience. This was Paul Levesque, the executive, the chief content officer, the man who sits in boardrooms and makes decisions that affect hundreds of performers and thousands of employees. He physically placed himself between Brock Lesnar and Omos and demanded that both men stand down, putting his own body in the space between two forces that had already proven they were willing to disregard every form of authority that had been presented to them that evening. Think about what that decision says about the severity of what was unfolding in that building. Triple H has been in the ring with every dangerous performer this business has ever produced. He has competed in matches so brutal they have become benchmarks for what extreme violence in wrestling can look like. And yet he felt compelled to step into that situation personally, because the normal structures of authority had completely failed and something genuinely dangerous was on the verge of happening in front of thousands of people. For a moment, it appeared as though his presence had worked. Brock stepped back. He seemed to acknowledge Triple H's authority. He gave every indication that he was willing to wait for WrestleMania to settle whatever needed to be settled between himself and Omos. And then he grabbed a security guard and delivered an F5. Not because the security guard had provoked him. Not because he felt physically threatened in that moment. He did it purely to demonstrate that compliance is something Brock Lesnar performs when it suits him and abandons the instant it does not. The F5 on that security guard was not random violence. It was a deliberate and calculated message aimed directly at Omos, a preview of what awaits him in Las Vegas, a reminder that Brock Lesnar can do exactly what he just did to that security guard to any living human being on this planet, and that Omos is not exempt from that reality simply because he happens to be large and powerful and unafraid. It was also, simultaneously, a direct and personal rejection of every instruction Triple H had just delivered. Management demanded order. Brock responded with chaos. Authority figures attempted to control the situation. Brock proved, in the most visceral way possible, that control is an illusion when he decides he does not want to be controlled. That is the moment Triple H made the phone call. Following the same precedent established when Seth Rollins was arrested for similar behavior, he contacted actual law enforcement. Not WWE security, not performers acting as officials, not backstage personnel with earpieces and matching jackets. Real NYPD officers who arrived backstage and placed Brock Lesnar under arrest while the rest of the locker room, presumably, watched in stunned silence. The implications of that decision are enormous and deserve to be taken seriously. WWE's chief content officer looked at the situation unfolding in his building, assessed what he was witnessing, and concluded that the only way to prevent genuine harm was to involve law enforcement. That is not a creative decision made to generate compelling television content. That is a safety decision made by someone who recognized that the line between performance and actual danger had been erased, and that the consequences of doing nothing would be far worse than whatever complications came with calling the police. Brock Lesnar being arrested backstage and taken out of Madison Square Garden by NYPD officers is an image that carries weight far beyond anything a scripted segment could manufacture. It is Brock Lesnar being treated not as a performer playing a character, but as a genuine public safety concern requiring the intervention of law enforcement. And it raises the stakes for WrestleMania 42 in Las Vegas to a level that is almost impossible to articulate, because now this is not simply about which of these two men wins a match. This is about Brock Lesnar proving to every single person who has ever tried to contain him, including Triple H, including law enforcement, including everyone who watched him get put in handcuffs, that nobody controls the beast incarnate. Not management, not security, not the New York City Police Department, and certainly not a rising monster who still has something left to prove. Adam Pearce posting about heavy fines on social media is WWE's attempt to assert that some form of institutional authority still exists after what happened at MSG. And it is an understandable attempt. Organizations need to be seen as functional and in control, especially after public incidents that call that control into question. But fines mean nothing to Brock Lesnar. When a man's legacy is being challenged, when someone is standing in his ring telling the entire world that the era of the beast is finished and something new and more powerful has arrived to replace it, financial penalties do not register as meaningful deterrence. They register as additional motivation. They become one more piece of evidence that the system wants to silence him, one more reason to make an example of Omos at WrestleMania so definitive and so complete that no one in that locker room, and no one watching from home, will ever entertain the idea of challenging him again. Now let us be honest and acknowledge the counterargument, because it is a legitimate one that deserves a fair hearing. There are people in this audience who will argue, and not without reason, that involving real law enforcement in a wrestling storyline is a dangerous and irresponsible blurring of lines between fiction and reality. When you arrest performers using actual police officers, you are creating a precedent with potential legal, ethical, and public relations consequences that extend well beyond the confines of a single television segment. You are asking law enforcement to participate in what is ultimately a performance, and that raises genuine questions about the appropriate use of public safety resources. Critics will also point out that the very fact police intervention was necessary makes WWE look like an organization that cannot manage its own talent, and that there is a ceiling to this kind of escalation. Either someone gets genuinely hurt, which is a tragedy, or the chaos resolves peacefully at WrestleMania, which after all of this build-up might feel like an underwhelming payoff to an audience that has been conditioned to expect something extreme. These are fair concerns. But here is the reality. The alternative to calling the police was allowing an uncontrolled physical confrontation between Brock Lesnar and Omos to happen in a public venue in front of thousands of fans, with no guarantee that anyone present, performers or otherwise, would walk away without serious injury. The arrest serves the story. It establishes that Brock is operating outside every boundary that normally contains talent like him. It creates a compelling underdog narrative for Omos, who is now facing an opponent so volatile that law enforcement had to be called simply to get him out of the building.